be going off of a presentation document as well. So, hey everyone, I'm Xavier Torres. I am an MBA candidate at the USC Marshall School of Business, and my game is Quantum Shift. Quantum Shift is an arcade-style, third-person, futuristic racing game. The gameplay revolves around a mechanic called shifting, but not in the gear-switching sense. In Quantum Shift, racers can switch dimensions. Racetracks exist in multiple realities, and racers can cycle through them as long as their reserves of shifter particles hold out. But each dimension has its hazards. Now, these hazards may exist in only one reality, or they can be shifting across realities themselves. The player has to figure out when to shift in the race for the fastest possible ride. Now, the story of Quantum Shift, to the extent that there is one, it's the distant future. Hover cars are the vehicle of choice, and hover sports are the modern iteration of motorsports racing. Sometime prior, scientists discovered a kind of quantum particle called shifters. They harness these particles' abilities to shift between dimensions and pass through solid objects in our world. This was quickly adopted in the hover sports sector, where initially to prevent the catastrophic crashes on the track. But it was eventually discovered that shifter particles can remain in these alternate realities for extended periods of time, which led to a revolution in the hover sport industry, where tracks got redesigned with these alternate realities in mind. Quantum Shift, I should probably read inspiration to something. Quantum Shift draws from futuristic Quantum Shift draws from futuristic racers like F-Zero and Wipeout. We're using games from that genre that had their heyday in the 90s as a benchmark for both our art style and our track design. We're also looking outside this frame of reference for inspiration for level design, level and environment art as well. From the ludicrous paths and rapid-fire obstacles in Sonic the Hedgehog to the color palette and environments of Speed Racer. An ideal version of Quantum Shift would feature 8 vehicles to choose from, 16 tracks, and a fully functional shifting mechanic and network multiplayer. I'd also want to try and include 4 game modes. A Grand Prix, comprised of a group of 4 tracks with a central environmental theme, versus a single track race to be selected in multiplayer only. Time Trial, a single player mode where also single track, but it's a race against time. And Collision Course, an infinite runner on a procedurally generated track that ends the second the player collides with something. When a player first launches the game, they can race on any track right off the bat, but they don't have access to all the vehicles. In the beginning, they only have access to 4. To get the other 4, they have to play sport first in all 4 Grand Prix races. The tracks get progressively more complex in their design, so the difficulty steadily increases as the player knocks them out. Solo players can also go through time trials for each track, both to practice for the Grand Prix races and for a shot at the best time leaderboard for each track. Time trials will also feature dev time so that players can get a leg up on us. Multiplayer has an option for custom player-hosted races to be played with a party of friends. There's also 2 kinds of matchmaking. Exhibition Circuit is our version of unranked matchmaking, a more casual endeavor where players are sorted into a lobby and given the option to vote on whatever track they want to race on. Pro Circuit is ranked matchmaking, Grand Prix only, and players don't get to vote on where they want to race. But players who place 3rd and up are awarded cosmetic trophies that they can then stick onto their vehicles and use elsewhere in the game. But there's a 99-cent buy-in, and that brings me to our revenue structure. So we're looking to launch on 4 platforms: Steam and the big 3 console platforms. Nintendo eShop, specifically we're targeting the Switch, PlayStation Store, and Windows Store to target the PS4 and Xbox and the Xbox One. We're looking to sell the game for $19.99 MSRP. There will also be an in-app purchase system. As I mentioned, Pro Circuit requires a 99-cent fee per entry. This is going to we'll be doing this will be tracked in the form of credits that players can buy in prepackaged groups via an in-app purchase store accessible via a dedicated button. Players can also earn credits by scrapping duplicate Pro Circuit trophies, doing well in the time trials, and placing well in the exhibition circuit. So, why Quantum Shift? Why a futuristic racer? Is there a market for this? Well, racing games brought in $2.4 billion in revenue in 2014, making up 5% of the total games market. But many games in that genre are racing simulators, which at this point is a fairly crowded market. It features realistic environments and, more pertinently, realistic cars, which require an expensive licensing fee to feature their likenesses. But futuristic racers comprise about 10% of all racing games ever made. At GDC, I spoke with Giuseppe Franchi, the lead designer of Redout, a futuristic racer launched in 2016, and it's his opinion that the market is going underserved. Releases going back 5 years consist mostly of Redout, which at this point has a little over 100,000 purchases on Steam, and a smattering of re-released hits from the 90s. We believe that Quantum Shift can help to fill this market gap. For AGP, we envision a vertical slice to be complete in December, featuring a time trial mode, one vehicle, and one track with shifting fleshed out and in a functional state. If we end up ahead of schedule, we'll also have the framework for network multiplayer and the Versus mode, and we'll have begun AI development and registration on our target platforms. By May, we'll have probably not a release candidate, but a minimum viable product, featuring all 4 modes. If we have time, we'll have 8 vehicles and 16 tracks. A minimum viable product will probably feature 4 vehicles and somewhere between 4 and 8 tracks, which will still be grouped into the appropriate number of Grand Prix races. We hope to launch. If we do have a release candidate, we'll be hoping to launch in mid-May of 2019. And that is Quantum Shift. This is the team. This is the team we have so far. It's me as the producer and Mark Orgel as lead designer. We also have a marketing manager, and we are currently recruiting for all of these positions. So that's all. That's Quantum Shift. That's all the time I have. So I'll be taking questions if anyone has any.
Yes, I'm curious to learn more about the core mechanic of the shifting. Is it a phase mechanic where you're phasing from one reality to another and you find yourself on a different track? Or is it a teleportation mechanic where it is distance as well as dimension?
It's closer to a phasing mechanic. The track exists more or less in the same shape and form in the alternate realities that have been built out for it, with minor variances in curves, elevation, and distortion. But the track will still be essentially the same length. You'll occupy the same space in all forms of the track. You just won't be tangible in all of them. You'll only be tangible in one of them.
And to be clear, you're going to be able to exploit different tracks to go in different directions?
Yeah, there will be extra shortcuts. There will be shortcuts in each track. There will be power-ups and obstacles scattered throughout all of the realities. And the realities that aren't our own will feature their own obstacles and possibly their own buffs and debuffs that you can stick around in that so that you can stick around in that reality and eventually gain an effect that you can transfer that you can eventually hold when you shift to another reality.
Two questions. The first one, when you're shifting, is it going to look different? You're going to be transported into a new world and then back and forth? And then the second one, did you
the first question, we're looking to actually we're looking to actually have a different environment to represent each dimension. Something with its own visual style for each one, possibly with its own elemental representation if we want to have say the 4 elements or something represent them. And as for the engine, it would depend largely on the expertise of the engineering team I build out. I would look to go. I would prefer to develop in Unreal, but I wouldn't mind if we end up developing in Unity.
Okay, no further questions? Excellent. All right.